Well, good morning, everybody, or good day, everybody. I want to welcome you to the SCSA, ASCII Advise, what we call the Executive Series. And with me is Mr. Alistair Dickinson, who's the Vice President of Human Resources for Graham Construction. And myself, Collin, Pullar, I'm the President of the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association. We don't do these very often. We try a few times a year to get the opportunity to speak with leaders in the construction industry who are at the executive, the ownership, senior management level, and to get their perspectives on not just safety, but really about leadership and how that translates into company performance, and in particular with performance around safety, which is clearly our mandate and interest. But again, knowing that that leadership drives behavior of the whole team. And so really, really excited to have Alistair with us. So for folks who don't know Alistair, Alistair was previously in the role as director for the Regina Bypass Project, and it was a phenomenal project, very large. But if I could just take a moment, just to welcome you, Alistair, and if you wouldn't mind, maybe just introducing yourself to those who may be watching or reading about this later.
Sure, thanks, Colin. So yes, my name's Alisdair Dickinson. I'm currently Vice President for Human Resources with Graham, but previously had worked in the operational world and was, as Colin said, the project director there for Regina Bypass. So there is a story there how I moved from ops to HR, which I'm sure we'll touch on a bit later. But yeah, I'm a civil engineer by trade. I worked in the UK for 10, 15 years, and I've been in Canada now for close to 10 years as well. So seen quite a lot of construction in different parts of the world, and different forms of construction as well, and different contract methods. But the one thing that's common is it's all people. So that's a key part of it.
Awesome. Well, I should mention what this particular call-in discussion, there's a whole element to it around award, which is a special award that we've just been calling the President's Award. I'm going to say it's a highly discretionary award. It's not something we'll give out every year, but in really unique circumstances, we like to recognize teams that have done something really, really unique. And it's not so much the size of it, but the complexity is really important to understand, and we'll dive into that. But really wanted to recognize the leadership team for this particular project, because there were some really fascinating results, and I know we're going to get into a little bit of the analytics discussion, just in terms of the number of hours that have been put in, and the nature of how you managed the safety parameters and injuries, and just some of the results we'll get into a bit. So I'll be virtually presenting with the award, and then we'll make sure that it gets out in the mail to you, so you can share it at your office. So the Regina Bypass Project, could you take a few minutes and just kind of give people a bit of a history on it, because you were the first director to kind of kick this off at the beginning. So really interested in how did this all come about, and who were the partners, and so let's maybe if you could start there.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, a project of this size and undertaking, kind of lends itself to a joint venture approach, whereby a group of like-minded companies come together and share the load, both commercially, risk management, and skill sets to deliver it. So the partners for this project were Vinci, Graham, Carmax, and Parsons, and we had a share of the joint venture split between us. Myself and my counterpart from Vinci, Jacques Durbin, we were involved fairly early on our side, bidding the project. for over a year and meeting with the client, the ministry, and the owner's engineer through that year process, starting to build relationships and understandings of what the expectations were for delivery of the project. So, I was involved through the bid of the project and had a deep understanding of, what we were offering in terms of our price and the scope, which I think that's one of the first important things to is that, in the construction world, if you have continuity of a team through a bid and into execution, I think that's a incredibly valuable thing, because the knowledge transfer then is first hand as opposed to, second or third hand. So, when we were successful in winning the project, Jack and myself were pretty much two of the first people to make our way out to Regina, along with a few other people that were involved with the bid. And from there, our focus was on building a team to deliver the project. And as you said, large project, technically not completely the most challenging thing, but the complexity came from the size, the environment per se, and just trying to pull so many people together in such a fast pace. But I think if you focus on this, building a team from the start, then leadership isn't about one person. It's not about even two or three people. We talk about leadership at all different levels. Yeah, there's got to be somebody who makes decisions and has ownership of certain things. But when it came to Regina, we tried to build a culture from early on with multiple companies and multiple countries, which wasn't easy. But I think halfway through the project, or even before that, I think you could look at that project and I don't think you could tell who worked for what company, and other than the accent, you couldn't really tell where they came from either.
Alistair, you just talked about something really important there. You just began to talk about culture, and I had the opportunity to meet you fairly early in the project. I was introduced to you, but at the same time I was introduced to you, I was introduced to I believe about 70 contractors in a room before dirt was turned over, I believe, and they all come from different companies, had different backgrounds. Some of them were maybe newer in terms of their maturity as a company, and you had to get them all on the same page. And one of the things I noticed that you were really focusing on was supporting a culture. And could you talk a bit more about that in terms of how you manage that, from a team perspective, and then what its impact or how it played out in terms of safety?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, first thing you've got to make sure is that everybody's on the same page and everybody's wanting the same thing out of this. And we started a partnering process with the key stakeholders. So the owner's engineer, the ministry's representatives, and the partners, and some of our key subcontractors, to make sure that we all had the same end goal in mind. And that might sound simple. I mean, everybody wants to be on time, on budget, but you'll find there's a lot of other drivers and motivators for different people, which are important to them and need to be understood. So once we had everybody on the same page, it's a movement, if you want to call it a better term. So you can't just turn a switch and create a culture. What you've got to try and do is set some behaviors, identify the qualities that you're looking for, create an environment where that can flourish, and then the culture starts to form. And what we find is that if you get to a tipping point, it's almost like the peer pressure kicks in and people start to look at it and say, well, actually, I'd rather be part of that. I don't want to be the odd one out. And getting that you talked about, the 70 contractors in the room, was really to support the ethos that the job was only going to be successful if everybody was successful. It didn't matter whether or not your scope was hundreds of thousands or tens of millions. It still had to be done. So everybody was equally as important, which meant that the expectations we had for everybody was the same. And when it came to safety, then what we would say is that this is our culture of caring. This is our culture for safety. We do care about it. And with the greatest of respect, we'd love you to come and join the project and be part of the family. But if you're not on board, then you can go somewhere else. We're very protective of this culture, and we're going to hold people, accountable to following it. And, once we got to that point where the people and the team, the hundreds of people that were out there were actually, driving that culture from the, on the ground, that's where we started to get, a lot more success. You can't drive that culture from.
So, we've had, lots of people, and I run into them personally, or sometimes our advisors do, or and I just imagine that this must have happened at some point, where you've got contractors, subcontractors, other parts, people who are, initially intending to be part of the team, but have a hard time fully buying in or saying, hey, that's just, there's too much emphasis, I'm throwing too much money or time at this safety thing. And how did you manage that? Like, you must have had a difficulty, and B, maybe some contractors that suddenly you couldn't utilize. And so did that cause any significant challenges for you?
Nobody comes to work to be unsafe. Nobody wants to come to work and kill themselves. So, I think if when you see a bad behavior, then we're an industry where we just love to throw the book at the poor person that's made the mistake at the end of the day. And usually, sadly, that's the person that's been injured, 9 times out of 10. I think, looking back and seeing, what was it actually drove that person to make that decision? Were they trying to cut a corner? Were they working too many hours? Was their boss or their manager not giving them the right funding or the money to do it? Usually those are the drivers towards, the downstream, issues that you have. So, we took a very proactive stance in getting the leaders of the companies that we're working with around the table. So not filling a room with, hundreds of people and trying to say, thou shalt follow our safety culture, but actually having more intimate conversations across the table with the owners, the people whose names were above the doors, and saying, do you believe in what we're trying to do here? And you can tell within 5 seconds, looking in somebody's eyes, whether or not they believe. And if they believe, then you can make it work. You can support. You can help. The safety systems. There is hundreds of safety systems in the world, or thousands and probably millions, but there's only one good safety system, really. At the end of the day, they're all different versions of the same thing, and we share. We can give you support from that point of view. We can provide you, with financial support if you need it in certain areas to be successful. We're not going to nickel and dime you on change or whatever. We want you to be profitable. That tends to help things. And, very seldomly will you see somebody who's like, yeah, I'm not interested in that, then thanks very much. You can go and work somewhere else. We don't really have that interest. But to focus and go after the people that are working hard every day, making decisions quickly and sometimes the wrong decisions, is not where we want to go.
Well, this is great. And I a little bit later on, I'd love to, if you're okay with it, get to what the bottom line impacts were around all of this. But I recognize in some of your processes, because you'd invited me out to a couple of them, where I saw that a few of those meetings where you drew some of the owners or senior managers of the contractors that were working with you, but you also had particular days where you got everybody to stop, it seemed. What drove these, sometimes we call them stand down days, or, what drove those things, and how did you sell the idea to owners? Because you're stopping work, but it still cost you. And I saw a room with 700 or 800 people. It felt like or maybe it wasn't quite that number, but it was a lot of people.
Well, it wasn't far off that number, to be honest. We have we all have stand downs when something goes wrong, don't we? we spend the money after the fact and stand down and try to reassess and re-educate. But again, being proactive. I mean, we had monthly safety meetings in the mornings, 6:30 in the morning, when the sun was coming up, even through the winter. And, the guys and girls would stand outside and, the intent there was to get the leadership team and the manager team and, those people out in front of people, so that they could associate, so that they could, know who's kind of providing the direction, know who they can go to if they need support. I remember the first one we did at the start of the project. We had everybody standing there being a wee bit, coy as to what this was about. And I asked everybody to walk 10 paces in the complete opposite direction of who they were standing next to, because I knew everybody gravitated towards, people they knew. And, I got a strange look. And so then they did it. And then I said, right, spend the next 10 minutes talking to the person that you're closest to now and find out about them, who they are, who their family is, create that humanity connection, because they're the people that you're going to be looking after. And that was the entire content of the safety meeting. It was just that, approach where we demonstrated that we cared. And then it became a bit of a competition between the teams to see who could come up with the most creative way to make it interesting. And we had, external people come in and talk. And then yearly we would do, what you refer to as the mass stand down. And I think the one one of the ones that we did, we had a large facility. We went to a lot of the local suppliers and equipment suppliers. We got them to set up stalls from Milwaukee and PPE and tools to around the area. And we had a couple of guest speakers, including somebody who had been impacted by an accident. And we tried to keep the preaching part of it to almost zero. It wasn't about a leader getting up and saying, thou shalt follow our safety rules. It was more to help people, build a bit of a relationship with people in the room, see what could happen if it doesn't work, but also allow, with the vendors there, show that we actually cared, that they had the right equipment, the right PPE and stuff like that. And, that was a full day. I think it was half a day anyway, but took a lot of planning, and we shut the site down completely. And yes, we did have people come and say, well, I need to be working. And we took that away from their conversation. Said, don't worry, you going in that room and sitting there or being part of that is not going to put you in a worse off position than you would have been if you were working. And that's important. So that was an investment, and a front end investment, which I think contributed to the results and also the culture.
So, doing that activity, it sounds like you really got a couple of things accomplished. I mean, as an example, you talked about people getting to know each other who were unfamiliar to them. They weren't in their initial sphere of influence or relationships, and building new relationships. Did that contribute to other performance outcomes and in terms of building the team? And any observations from that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the project success came from, the team spirit, the team morale, the right people. The partnering that we did, and I call it true partnering. I mean, I see a lot of reference to partnering where we kind of get everybody in a room and we sing Kumbaya and we tick a box and we all think we're partnered. But, it doesn't work. Partnering is an effort, an ongoing effort. About building relationships and trust and respect for each other. And I have deep relationships now with the team that we had out there. Still, I think the team does with each other, and my relationship with some people from the ministry and SAS Builds and the owner's engineer, I think will go on for years to come. Now, that's a sign of true partnering, whereby we cared about each other. I know more about their families probably than I do about their career histories. And that then leads, I think, to everything, heading in the right direction. I think you can execute well, you can be productive, you can make money, you can be on time, your quality is good because people have pride in what they're doing. And most importantly, safety follows from having, that caring and that environment. I mean, you can tell when you walk on a site where, there's usually a correlation between an unsafe site and a bad project. And, why are they bad? Well, usually because bad behaviors are bad, now, don't get me wrong. I mean, you've got to have enough money in the pot
Right.
to do it, or it's a battle from the start. But I've done projects where we didn't have enough money in the pot, but we still came away with strong relationships because we got those things out on the table early on.
Right. Can we pivot to some things around some of the results that you saw in this project, and to focus it a little bit? I was aware that there were literally millions of human hours put into this project, and there was a really close tracking to not just the injuries, but near misses and maybe things that you had to do in terms of maybe slowing work down to actually speed it up. Could you talk about that? I understand there was like 7 or 8 or 9 million hours or something like that. I'm not sure what if you could tell me the truth to the rumor, that would be great.
Yeah, there was certainly, millions of hours through the whole course of the project. But I just want to go back a bit and say, we tend to get bogged down a wee bit on tracking stats, thinking that that's what's making the difference. And, to me, that was an output of some of the other things that were happening. Our kind of incident rate, I would call it, was quite high early on in the project for a while, to the point where we were concerned. But when we started looking at the data, what we found is that the reporting was excellent. So we had people reporting if the door got caught in the wind and blown open, and damaged a wing mirror or cracked a window, or we got a near miss reported because the same thing happened and nearly caught somebody in the knee. So we created a culture where things were getting reported that were happening, and that allowed us to look at the trends and say, okay, well, is there something we can do, mechanically, or can we invest some money to prevent, those things happening before we actually have somebody getting injured. The other thing we drove was what we called the leadership engagement indicators. What we were actively trying to make sure happened was that the leaders in the project, and by that it wasn't just myself or Jacques or the other leaders, but the experienced superintendents, the people who have been there, done it, were engaging and were out. So we used to set them some targets around going out and having a look at the sites, talking to people, with a view that if they were out having the conversations, we were, creating the environment where we could identify there was problems. So, always asking, how's it going today, any issues and stuff like that, we'd identify things ahead of the time. And when we had our monthly project meetings, the first slide that we put on the screen was that leadership engagement thing, and that allowed us to look and say, well, hey, Joe Bloggs, you're kind of you're not keeping up with the trend here we've seen of people being 80 to 100% out there doing what they need to do. And that's where we put the energy in, rather than the stats on the downside as to how many people we were or weren't hurting, or how many people had, how many hours we were burning. We knew we had to burn the hours. The trick to me was doing it without impacting anybody's life, however we did that.
What you're talking about there, Alistair, is something that's often measured in called maturity management, or management maturity models, sorry, where you can predict outcomes based upon some of the based on elements that the leaders are doing, how visible they are, how frequently that they're on site, asking questions, offering the opportunity for employees to ask questions, and those things contribute to results, whether it be in safety or finding new or innovative ideas to solve problems.
Yeah, I mean, the information you get firsthand from the field is gold. I mean, we actually did an experiment once where we sent a message out into the field, and then a few of us went out and spoke to a couple of the the labourers or the traffic marshals, and asked them what the message was they got, and it was frightening how different it was from what we'd sent out. So, without that feedback loop, then we weren't realising that, we could have been sitting in the room or sharing the message, with as many people as we thinking we're doing a great job, but if it's not getting down to where it needs to, then there's no point, to be honest. Part of that leadership is getting your boots on and going out and rubbing shoulders and, sharing that belief that, we're all just cogs in a wheel. So no matter the size of the project, maybe my stress levels were slightly higher than a few others, but at the end of the day, I had a part to play, as did, the other 1,000 people who were working at peak time on the job.
So with all that, I say that that human investment, that psychological, emotional investment that was done, could you speak to kind of how did things end up? This was a multi-year project. I think it was scheduled for 4 years, but how did things end up for you when you kind of look back and yes, you have some data. It probably told you some things, and as you mentioned, there might be some parts of the data that could be misleading if you're just like, hey, you've got a lot of reporting going on, but you saw that as a positive. Are there any other notable elements around either the results that you saw, data, trends, anything that somebody who watching or reading about this could learn?
Well, I suppose the first thing is, if you go and ask anybody that worked on the job and how they felt, I think most of them will tell you it was the best job they ever worked on. I think a lot of us miss it. We're just getting ready to start another job in the province over here, and we've got a few of the same faces, and we're actually consciously trying not to reference Regina too much, because it's a bit of a, you guys, this is a new job with a new team and stuff like that, but the people who have come from Regina are like, well, this is how we did it there, and we need to do this, and that there was lots of lessons learned along the way. By no means was it perfect, but the outcome was that I think that the province and the ministry got what they were looking for. I think that the partnering companies, we made a profit, a fair profit out of the project, which is what everybody's looking for. I think we've got relationships which will last long after the job as well, and we didn't impact anybody's life, which is the most important thing. And that's not to say that there wasn't a few bits and pieces along the way, because we work in a risky business, but that to me is the most important thing. And did we update some procedures? Yeah. Did we update some processes? Yeah. But I think the legacy is people went away from that job knowing that it could be done different, and that's now what they should benchmark as the expectation when they go to the next job. And that's the start of the cultural movement, isn't it, when you get people spreading out and demanding the same. And we're seeing it. I think Vinci are seeing it, Parsons are seeing it, Graham are seeing it with some people who have gone out and done their own jobs, and they've taken that behavior with them.
Okay, so we're in a time where COVID-19 is clearly impacted the economy, and a number of governments, and not just here in Saskatchewan, but across the country, are making significant infrastructure investments to help restart the economy. Is there any advice that you can give to companies that are doing major or minor infrastructure work in terms of what you've learned and how what they can take into those projects, attitudes, behaviors? Any advice that you can offer at all?
Yeah, I suppose I think this applies to clients and owners, engineers as well. Is that be realistic about what we're actually trying to do here. We are our own worst enemy in this industry. If you go to any other industry, they tend to work a bit better than the client, the owner's engineer, and the contractor. Owners, engineers, contractors have difficult relationships. It's like a triangle of three, and nobody ever manages to get that aligned where everybody's pulling in the same direction. But when you do, you know, you get pretty good results. And you know, don't race to the bottom. You know, that you know, in an industry where, you know, times are tough, and you know, the need to win work is maybe more elevated than it has been in the past. We tend to cut a wee bit here and a cut a bit there, and you know, you can spend a whole year bidding these jobs, and you nickel and dime on your estimate, and then just before you're closing, you're like, oh, we really want this one, and you start shaving, you know, millions off. Let's try and avoid that, because again, we're all our own worst enemies, and it only takes one or two people to start doing it, and then we all start to do it because we're chasing each other. And what that means is that, yeah, somebody will win the job and they'll rock up on the first day, and they're behind the start line before they even get going. You know, you can't resource the job properly because you don't have the right money for people. You can't buy the right equipment. You can't provide. You're just cutting corners all the time, and then the behaviour that starts from day one is chasing claims, which then doesn't help your relationship with either the owner's engineer or the client. So, you know, I suppose my advice to, you know, contractors is that, you know, if you want the safety to improve and you want to deliver quality products, is that, you know, stand your ground. You know, believe in the service you provide, and if people are not prepared to pay you fairly for that service, then I wouldn't bother going and doing it, to be honest.
Awesome. Thanks, Alistair. If I can make a pivot to, and it's very much about the role that you have today, and you're now the Vice President of Human Resources for Graham, and so you know, so you'll probably have a perspective that a number of people who are watching or listening to this would be interested in, and that's really, you know, some of my questions, and I get asked this question a lot around culture, but particularly the focus on inclusivity. That particular topic has in recent weeks and months been brought to the forefront in business. It's probably one of the most common topics that are brought up around board and executive tables with publicly traded companies, and I think with private companies as well. And it's often been from the question of, you know, how does this affect our performance? And if we are we thinking about inclusivity in terms of it's contributing to company performance, and how does that affect safety, or does it affect safety, or how does that affect mental health, or does it affect mental health? You've had some time in this role, but you've also had time as a leader and seeing different people work together. And do you have any thoughts around that? And I'm leaving that wide open for you know, what you think is important to talk about here.
Yeah, certainly the hot topic at the moment. I mean, you know, first off, I mean, my transition into HR, I think for me, I mean, I have the most amazing team, you know, at Graham here on HR, who have been career professionals in HR for, you know, some of them, you know, nearly a decade or 2 decades. Without that, you know, our HR offering might be slightly narrow, but what I think I brought, and the reason why I was really interested in the switch is that, again, going back to the people component. I mean, you know, doing it at project level is one thing. Doing it at you know, an organizational level and trying to influence that was a challenge. And you know, I'm always up for a challenge. You know, the getting everybody pulling in the same direction, creating that one team or one company culture, I think is incredibly important to the success of everything. Specifically to the, you know, the inclusivity and the diversity. I mean, I think I've done a lot of research over the last 6 months. I had preconceived conceptions that I think most people do, and you know, I think we always tend to stereotype a lot of this. I think if you break it down into its kind of fundamentals, I think diversity creates an environment where you get innovation, you get collaboration, you get different ways of thinking. So, you know, whether that's male, female, cultural background, different countries, you know, different ages, the more mix you have in the pot, I think the more opportunity you have to think outside the box, come up with new ways of doing it, you know, move your company forward and be a leader rather than a follow. That's diversity. The means to get to diversity is being inclusive. You have to create an inclusive environment, because I think if you look at, you know, particularly if you look at demographics, I think you find, you know, most companies in the lower levels will have quite a broad diversity, but the inclusivity then isn't there to sustain that and grow that through the organization or to make it longer term. So I think focusing on being inclusive, you know, creates diversity, which leads to better outcomes, both safety, quality, profitability. But again, I think, you know, we tend to fall into the same traps when we talk about inclusivity. I mean, I've been looking at statistics about the percentage of males, the percentage of females, so on and so forth. And I'm asking myself, that kind of sounds a wee bit like the lagging indicators we have on the safety side of things. So what's the you know, proactive approach here? Well, you know, maybe we should look at having work arrangements, which creates an environment and more inclusive environment for different people to go on paternity leave or to work from home with their family, create flexible hours so that people can have, you know, better access to medical support or childcare. So focus on creating the things that build that inclusive workplace. You know, obviously call out the bad behaviors. I think you've got to be brave to call out the bad behaviors. But looking at your leadership team and saying, oh, it's all male or it's all female, or we don't have that demographic, and trying to plug it in, I think that's a reactive, pointless exercise. I think you've got to go back and look at, you know, how did that happen in the first place, and then start to change that. And I think over time you'll see that starting to build. And I think most companies, you know, are at the start of that journey. You know, some companies have nailed it, you know, fairly early on, but you know, our industry is, you know, we always joke about how Neanderthalic our industry is. I mean, we still work with labour, you know, materials and equipment, and you know, which is how they built the pyramids. We haven't really changed much over, you know, hundreds, never mind thousands of years. So I think we're at that start, but I think, you know, my view is, let's not look at the stats. Let's not try and plug things in to artificially make it look good. Let's go back and look at, you know, what's the fundamental problems that you have. Start to change that from the bottom up and let it grow organically.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. And you know, I've got the opportunity, and like I said, well, we're going to get this out to you, but I really wanted to have this fairly wide-ranging conversation because I know there was a lot of thinking and going on behind the scenes outside of what we would read on the headlines, like I said at the beginning here. And I really appreciate you and the thought processes you've been going through, particularly what you just talked about in the last several months. And because I think it's also quality of a leader who's, you know, can be reflective, learn from that experience, and then apply it on the next thing, and be reflective again, and repeat that process over and over as they grow. So we have if you can make that out, we have a special president's award here, which we are going to get out to your office there. And I'll make sure it's all disinfected before you put it in the box.
COVID-friendly award, yeah.
No, and then maybe we'll put a pair of gloves in there so you can take it out and be safe that way. So
and it's got a lot of people to go around, so it'll be on a journey. We might take some photos of where it ends up, but you know, I want to make sure that the whole team gets to see it and recognise that award. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. So again, thank you, Alistair, for taking the last 45 minutes, an hour here with me and having this conversation. I think there was a lot that I learned just in these last few minutes here from you, that I made a few notes as you were speaking, and I think for others this also gives an opportunity to learn too. So congratulations to you, the entire Bypass team. And the organization. Wish you absolutely the best in this new role for you. I think if what you said over the last few minutes is any indicator, I think you're going to be just fantastic for your organization. And so again, really appreciate it, and I thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Colin, and stay safe. And we're sure we'll have a face-to-face soon.
Yeah, we'll do for sure.
Yes. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.